My name is Marcus Tillman. I'm 41 years old, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I've got a voice that carries, a mind that writes fast, and a face that people remember, but not always for the right reasons. I've lived with facial asymmetry my whole life. They never found out exactly what caused it. Nerve damage, maybe. A birth trauma no one documented properly. My jaw sits off to the left, my mouth never fully closes when I talk, and when I get animated. When I really start speaking from the gut, you can see it twist in ways most people aren't used to. It doesn't hurt anymore. Not physically, but I learned young that the world flinches before it listens. I used to think it was just kids who stared, just strangers, but I was wrong. Grown-ups just hide it better, and in the world I wanted to. Enter, media, content, storytelling. They didn't even hide it. They just looked at me once and moved on. But I kept writing. I kept talking to myself in empty rooms, rehearsing lines that no one had asked to hear yet. I believed in my voice before anyone else did, even when it echoed back off the walls like it didn't belong anywhere. I had an idea for a podcast. Not just some rambling monologue, but something sharp, narrative-driven, intimate. It was about people who stay invisible in rooms they helped build, about how truth sounds when it's not wrapped in perfection. I'd written 6 full episodes, outlined a season arc, even mocked up titles and artwork. The voice in my head told me it was good, the kind of good that could shake people if they gave it 5 minutes of their time. I submitted it to a local media studio running an open call for new creators. They asked for a sample script, a concept, and a test voice recording. I sent it all in, tight, polished, professional. They replied within a week, said they wanted to meet me in person. I showed up early the day of the meeting, clean shirt, fresh haircut, brought my notes, my outline, even some audio edits I'd done on my own. It was one of those open floor plan offices. White walls, succulents, big windows, people tapping on laptops with noise-canceling headphones. A woman greeted me, offered water, then told me to wait near the sound booth. I could hear someone recording in the next room. Perfect voice, smooth delivery, that Instagram radio cadence. I knew the tone. Everyone wants that voice. Clean but emotional. Marketable. I had something else. After 10 minutes, they called me in. There were 3 of them. One asked questions, the other smiled too much, and the third barely looked up from his notes. I pitched. Not just the show, but the reason behind it. The people I wanted to reach. The ones who don't see themselves in polished ads or curated feeds. I told them how growing up with a wrong face teaches you how to see through performance, how to hear when something's real. I spoke clearly. I didn't hide my mouth. I let it move the way it always has. I let them see everything. And when I was done, they were polite. Too polite. One of them said the idea was powerful. Another said my writing was solid. Then there was a pause, the kind that fills with everything people don't say out loud. They started asking about other formats. Have you considered doing this without video? Maybe something more heavily produced? More anonymous? One of them said, almost casually, that certain stories work best when the focus stays on the content. That's when I understood. They weren't rejecting the show. They were rejecting the frame it came in. They couldn't say it straight, but I could feel it in the way they avoided my eyes when I smiled. The way they complimented my voice but never acknowledged what it looked like when it came out of my mouth. To them, I was a liability they didn't want to explain. Too real, too uneven, too raw for the kind of polished vision they were trying to build. Then one of them looked down at a resume, someone who hadn't even been in the room, and said, "We're leaning toward this guy. He's got some on-camera presence and the brand fits a little tighter." They said it like I wasn't there. Like I was just another draft they had to politely decline. I nodded. I thanked them. I packed my things. And as I walked past their glass office walls, I saw my reflection in the surface. Mouth half open, jaw crooked, eyes tired, but clear. That's when I decided I wasn't going to wait to be chosen again. I didn't need their booth. I just needed one mic. I went home that evening with my bag heavier than usual, though there was nothing inside it but my notebook and the same mic I'd been carrying for over a year. The rejection didn't hit all at once. It didn't crash into me like a single blow. It pressed down slowly, like a weight that finds your ribs and sits there. On the walk home, I passed storefront windows and caught my reflection again and again, each time wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe my face didn't fit the frame. Maybe this was just the truth I hadn't been strong enough to admit. I'd told myself that talent mattered more, that a clear voice, a crafted story, an honest message would carry. But sitting alone in my apartment that night, with nothing but the flicker of the streetlight bleeding through the blinds, I couldn't help but remember the look they gave each other in that room, that silent exchange, the way they circled around, the real reason like it was too awkward to speak aloud, like being not quite a visual fit was just part of the business, not a judgment. But it was, and I felt it deeper than I wanted to admit. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and stared at myself for a long time. My mouth hung half open, the muscles around my jaw still loose from a day of talking. The uneven pull of my lips, the slight droop on the left side, the way my chin sat just off-center, all of it had become so familiar to me that I'd forgotten how much it unsettled other people, and I hated that I was starting to see it the way they did. Hated that I was tracing the angles of my own face like I was searching for flaws instead of strength. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. I pulled up the sample audio I had recorded weeks ago before the meeting, back when I still believed they'd see past the surface. I played the file. My voice filled the room, confident, warm, paced just right. The words still landed. The rhythm still worked. It was good. It was everything I'd hoped it would be. And yet, I couldn't hear it without also hearing their silence, their polite decline, their disappointment that the voice didn't come with the face they wanted. That was the part that burned the most. Not that they said no, but that they made me feel like I was wrong to believe I ever had a chance. That I was foolish to think that anything I made could matter if it came through a face like mine. But deep under that shame, something else stirred. Something quiet. Something meaner. Not cruel, not loud, but sharp. I realized they hadn't rejected my work. They hadn't even really seen it. They'd seen my face first and decided the rest wasn't worth looking at. And if that was the lens they used to judge, then their judgment didn't mean a damn thing. So I made a decision. Not a brave one. Not some burst of rebellion, just a slow, deliberate refusal to disappear. I cleared off the desk in the corner of my room, pulled the mic from my bag and set it down, opened my editing software. I didn't have lighting gear. I didn't have a backdrop or a camera crew. I had one mic, a battered laptop, and a voice that had been waiting too long to speak without asking for permission. I hit record, and I talked, not just through the script I'd written, but around it, inside it. I let the lines breathe. I let the truth come through, not dressed up or polished, but raw. I talked about what it felt like to be seen but never looked at, about the quiet violence of being almost good enough, but never quite right, about being told to shrink, to step aside, to stick to audio only, as if visibility was a privilege granted only to the symmetrical, the curated, the beautiful. I said it all, and when I finished, I didn't listen back. I didn't edit. I didn't touch a thing. I saved the file with the date, uploaded it to a private folder, and closed the laptop. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from the weight of finally letting the truth live in my own voice. I didn't feel proud. I felt exposed, like I'd peeled something open that couldn't be closed again. But in that exposure, in that rawness, there was something real, something more honest than anything I could have made with their help. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine, and I was done asking for approval. The morning I uploaded the episode, the sky outside was the color of metal. One of those overcast days where the light barely shifts, where hours blur together and everything feels held in place. I hadn't slept much the night before. I'd laid in bed with my eyes open, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak in the walls, my own breathing cycling too fast. I wasn't nervous about what I'd said. I was nervous about what it meant that I'd said it. There's a difference between dreaming of being heard and actually handing your voice over to the world. One is control, the other is exposure. The file sat there on my desktop, untouched. It still had the rough file name I gave it that night. Something messy, something temporary. It wasn't meant to be the final version. I had intended to clean, hit up, layer in music, tighten the timing. But I didn't. Something about the imperfection of it felt honest. Like dressing a wound but refusing to hide the scar. I opened the hosting platform, filled in the title field with shaking fingers, and didn't give it a name that tried to be clever. I called it what it was. Then I hit upload, one mic, one take, no safety net. That was it. I didn't tell anyone. No announcement, no post. I didn't even message the 3 people who had supported me quietly through the early drafts. I wanted to know what would happen if the work lived on its own. No filters, no marketing, just truth, floating out into the void. The first few hours, nothing, a few plays, one anonymous listener from Michigan, another from somewhere in the UK, then silence. I closed the tab and went for a walk. The cold air bit at my face, and for the first time, I didn't wonder what people saw when they passed me on the street. I was too tired, too stripped. That episode had taken something out of me that I wasn't sure I'd get back. The next day, I checked the stats again. 52 plays, 9 downloads. Still nothing special, but something about it felt different. Like the silence wasn't empty. It was holding its breath. By the end of the week, it crossed 2,000. Not viral, but not nothing. The comments started slowly. One, then another, then a handful. They weren't loud, they were quiet, thoughtful. Direct messages from people I'd never met telling me that hearing someone speak like that, crooked, uncertain, real, had made them feel like they weren't alone. One man said he listened to the episode 3 times in a row during his night shift. A woman wrote that she hadn't seen her own face in a mirror without flinching in 5 years, but something in my voice made her try again. None of them mentioned how I looked. None of them asked. They only talked about the way it felt. That's when I realized what I'd done. I hadn't made content. I hadn't launched a brand. I told the truth, unpolished, undeniable. And something in that truth, flawed as it was, found its way into people who didn't care whether the mouth speaking it moved the right way. That first upload became something I couldn't stop. I recorded a second episode, then a third. I didn't change the format. I didn't bring in guests or hire a producer. I sat alone at my desk with the same mic, the same scar, the same uneven mouth, and I spoke, each one in a single take. No rehearsal, no second try, and every time it landed deeper. The numbers climbed, the messages multiplied. A few people asked if I'd do video. I hesitated. I stared at my own face on the webcam preview for a long time. I thought about how much easier it was to stay hidden behind sound, but I remembered what they said in that studio, that my face wasn't right, that my presence would distract, that people wouldn't listen if they had to look. So I turned the camera on, just once. No lights, no filters, just me. And I let the recording run. I didn't look away. I didn't blink. I just told the story again. The same one that had lived in my bones for years. The same one they told me no one would ever want to see. I uploaded it without a caption, and within 24 hours it passed 100,000 views. Not because it was perfect, because it was one take, because it was one shot, and for the first time in my life I hadn't waited for someone to give me permission to take it. When the numbers started climbing, I didn't celebrate. I froze. Each new view, each new comment, each quiet wave of attention felt like a risk I hadn't prepared for. People were watching. Not just listening, but watching. And no matter how strong my words were, no matter how clear my voice came through the mic, a part of me was still bracing for what I had been trained to expect my whole life. Rejection. That wears politeness like a mask. They tell you the world's changing, that authenticity is finally allowed, but it never really prepares you for what happens when the thing they said was too hard to look at is the thing they choose to look at anyway. I avoided the comments for the first few days. I'd post the episode, set everything live, then shut the laptop like I was sealing a door. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to see the sentences that started with, "I mean, it's great," but, or the forced empathy that drips off people trying to be kind without knowing they're still cutting you. I thought ignoring it would help. I told myself it was about the work, not the response. But late at night, when the room was dark and my chest felt tight and the silence got too loud, I opened the comment sections anyway. And they weren't what I expected. They didn't talk about the way my jaw moved or the asymmetry of my face. They didn't use the language of tolerance or frame their praise with disclaimers. They didn't apologize for seeing me. They just saw me. They heard what I said. They repeated the words back. They built something with them. One man wrote that he never realized how many conversations he'd avoided in his life because of how he looked. Another said he'd stopped speaking up in meetings 5 years ago because every time he saw his face in a webcam preview, something inside him recoiled. They weren't reacting to my story. They were recognizing themselves in it. But even then, I struggled to believe it. I had spent so long flinching from my own reflection that validation didn't land as easily as silence used to. I kept replaying the recording, but not for the words. I was watching my face, watching how the muscles pulled, how the jaw dipped just a fraction too far left, how the lower lip caught on the syllables like they were trying to escape from a broken mechanism. It wasn't self-hate. Not anymore. It was something colder, like forensic examination, like trying to figure out what they saw that I didn't. Every time I opened the camera now, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to speak, but because I wasn't sure I could bear to look myself in the eye while doing it. I'd lean in, hover over the record button, and just stare at my own image on the screen, frozen, waiting for something to change. I didn't want to perform. I didn't want to smile just to prove I was okay. I didn't want to soften the rawness. But the fear wasn't about how others would see me. The fear was that maybe, deep down, they'd see too much, and I wouldn't be able to handle their acceptance, because that's the part no one tells you. When you've built your identity around being avoided, being wanted is terrifying. Being watched is exposure. Being heard is a mirror. And mirrors don't lie. They don't flatter. They don't soften. They show you what's there, even when you've spent years avoiding it. One night I sat in front of the mirror for 20 minutes before recording the next video. No lights, no audio. Just me, sitting there, forcing myself to look, not to adjust, not to improve, just to witness. My face twitched the way it always had. My mouth stayed open the way it always does. I watched as my own expression changed, not into something I liked, but into something I understood, something I accepted. It wasn't healing, it wasn't beautiful, but it was honest, and that was enough. I hit record, and this time I watched the red light blink and didn't look away, because I knew what I was afraid of now. Not ridicule, not cruelty, not the backlash I'd once feared. The real fear was that I'd become visible and have nothing left to hide behind. But the moment I spoke, that fear didn't go away. It just lost its power. I wasn't trying to go viral. That was never the point. I didn't have a growth strategy, didn't map out any kind of content funnel, didn't optimize thumbnails or tweak captions for visibility. I uploaded the episodes the same way I had. From the beginning, one mic, one take, no filters. But something shifted after that fourth video. I don't know if it was the way I paused mid-sentence and didn't cut it, or the story I told about being 16 and getting pulled off a school play because a parent complained I looked uncomfortable to watch. Maybe it was the look in my eye when I said I still remember that mother's face more clearly than my own in that year. Whatever it was, it landed somewhere deep in people, and it spread. At first, it felt like static. Notifications, tags, a slow trickle of people sharing it, saying this is the thing I couldn't put into words. Then a journalist picked it up, some online blog known for curating underdog stories. They called me a brutally honest storyteller with a face that dares you to look closer. I didn't know how to feel about that sentence. I copied it into a doc and stared at it for hours. I think they meant it as a compliment. I think they wanted to honor what I'd done. But even the praise carried weight that I'd lived. With in silence, weight that now everyone else was trying to hold up like a trophy. I woke up one morning and my inbox was full, not just with comments or reposts, but offers, collaboration requests, production studios, brands asking if I'd be open to aligning. People who had never returned my emails before were suddenly calling my voice needed in the market. It all felt wrong, or maybe just off. Like walking through a room you'd only seen from the outside. Familiar in theory, but cold once you're inside. The video passed 100,000, then 200, then 500,000. The numbers didn't feel real anymore. What felt real was the silence from the people who'd first said no. The studio that looked me in the eye and told me they were going in a different direction. I hadn't heard a word from them. Not a comment, not a repost, not even a quiet like from a burner account. Just silence. And the silence said everything. They saw it. I know they did. The clip had passed through all the circles they lived in. It had been shared in the same spaces they built their careers around. I wasn't bitter. I didn't want them to apologize. But I wanted to know what it felt like. To hear the same voice they once turned down echoing louder than their own. I didn't respond to most of the emails. Not right away. I kept recording, episode after episode, letting each one cut a little, deeper than the last. Not to provoke, not to entertain, but because now I had people listening, and I owed them honesty, the kind I'd been denied for most of my life. I didn't hide the fear. I didn't hide the shame. I didn't dress the words up to make them easier to swallow. I let them fall the way they came, uneven, rough, exposed, and somehow that's what people kept showing up for. There was a moment, maybe 2 weeks after the clip hit 1 million, when I sat alone on my couch at 2 a.m. watching the view counter blink upward, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Panic. Not fear. Panic. The kind that grips your ribs from the inside, that makes your breathing shallow even in stillness. Because I realized that all of this had happened without me trying to win. I hadn't built a brand. I hadn't polished a product. I'd simply told the truth. And now, somehow, it belonged to everyone else. It wasn't part of the plan. I hadn't expected to be wanted. I hadn't prepared for the way people would hold my pain like a mirror. So I pulled back for a day. No posting, no recording. I let the inbox sit full, unopened. I needed to remember why I started. I needed to remind myself that this wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about being seen. It was about speaking because silence had taken too much already. And when I sat back down in front of the mic, I didn't script it. I didn't rehearse. I just hit record and said what I was feeling. That I was overwhelmed. That I didn't trust the attention. That I wasn't sure how to keep showing up without losing the part of myself that made this real in the first place. It became the most shared episode I'd ever released, because something always goes off plan when the story is real. And sometimes what goes off plan is the part that actually works. I kept waiting for the message. Not because I needed it. Not because I wanted some dramatic apology or an invitation to come back to the table they once pushed me away from. I waited because I was curious, because somewhere deep inside, I wondered what people do when the story they dismissed becomes the one everyone else is telling. I imagined the scene in their office, one of them opening the article, seeing my face next to a headline they didn't write. Maybe they played the clip. Maybe they recognized the tone of my voice, the rhythm of the words, the way it all sounded exactly like it did the day I sat in front of them, just stripped of the part they couldn't edit out. I wondered if any of them said my name out loud. I wondered if they remembered how quickly they moved on to someone else. But they never called. They didn't write. They didn't reach out, not even to claim credit. And in some strange way, that was the clearest confirmation of all, that they hadn't just overlooked me. They never really saw me. Not even now. I had become the voice in a viral video, the name behind 1 million views, the headline someone else wrote. But to them, I was still the guy with the wrong face. The one who didn't match their frame, the one they didn't know how to fit into their feed. And so they did what they'd always done. They looked away. And that's fine, because by then, I had already built something they couldn't touch, a space that didn't ask me to shrink, a following that didn't need perfect lighting or a press release, a voice that had found its rhythm, in the quiet, not the spotlight. I kept showing up, every week, one episode after another. People didn't come for performance. They came because someone finally said what they'd been carrying for years, but never had the words for. They called it brave. I never felt brave. I felt honest, and that honesty took me further than any audition room or meeting table ever had. It connected me to people I would never meet, in cities I would never see, in lives I would never touch, except through sound, except through the one thing no one could filter. I started getting letters, not just comments, handwritten pages from prisons, from shelters, from hospital rooms. One man said he listened while waiting for reconstructive surgery. Another wrote that his daughter was born with a facial difference and that hearing my voice made him feel less alone in his fear. These weren't fan messages, they were testimonies. Not to me, but to the part of themselves they thought no one would ever understand. And suddenly the silence from that studio didn't matter, because my voice had gone places they could never follow. They had walls. I had reach. They had format. I had truth. And the truth doesn't ask to be broadcast. It just waits to be heard. Sometimes I would think back to that first pitch, to the way I walked out of their building feeling smaller than I had in years. I'd remember the sound of my own footsteps down the hallway, the reflection in the glass, the door closing behind me. And I'd smile, not because I won, but because I didn't stop. That was the difference. They stopped listening. I kept talking, and the world, without being asked, started listening back. So, no, they never called, and I'm glad they didn't, because if they had, I might have been tempted to believe I still needed their permission. But I never did, and I never will.